All right. Well, Gary and I met each other a few years ago at a conference. I was talking about engaging persons with dementia. And Gary and Joe Karachi, who is his partner there at Monarch Pathways, were talking about engaging staff. And so we heard each other's presentations, and we decided that this would be a good way to think about an entire system that would use Montessori approaches, the key elements of respect and dignity, not just towards persons with dementia, but towards those who deliver their care. We began to talk about how to train for that. And so what you're looking at is a taste of what is evolving and that we're taking out into the world now. So I'm a psychologist, but I'm a tame psychologist. I do research. We're with the Center for Applied Research in Dementia, but our research is translational. It has to be able to be used. And so we ask really strange questions like, what do you need and did it work? So that's kind of mostly who I am. And Gary, I'll turn it to you.
Yeah, so when Cameron and I met, he was talking and I was actually sitting in the hall in the back, and I was so compelled by what he was saying. I ended up just getting up and standing in the back, and I was sort of amazed at a number of the things that he was presenting. And I was glad he sat in on our presentation. So from that was probably a couple of years ago, we've really sort of developed a partnership. So I think one thing that we would be interested in you all considering is the Montessori-inspired principles that Marie Montessori used with students in school. Cameron has really crafted that to apply to residents. And we're applying those same principles with staff. And we'll talk more about why it's a human thing, but we'll go to the next slide if I can. You want to talk a bit about this, Cameron?
Sure. So we do work with National Council of Certified Dementia Practitioners. People have been asked, is there a way to get certified as a person who uses Montessori principles with persons with dementia? So we have an online course that is available through ICCDP here, and there's their website. And so to get more information about that, you can check with them, and we encourage you to do that. Today's presentation is a brief overview of what we're doing. So, and if people have had Montessori for dementia training in the past, there's a grandfathering option for getting a certification as a Montessori for dementia professional. And again, you'd go to that website.
Just before Cameron talks about this slide, it's interesting to me that we composed this slide before COVID-19. So just in general, these are challenging times. And now they're even more challenging. So Cameron, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, there are states in my country where half of the job openings in senior care don't get patients. In this crisis, Gary and I have seen instances where people don't show up for work in memory care, sometimes en masse. It's a crisis. And what happens is that if you have a place where people don't feel appreciated where they work, then that translates not only into the care they deliver, but whether they come to work in a crisis situation. Maria Montessori believed that the most important task of a teacher was not to teach, as we say, but to observe and to create an environment that encourages people to teach themselves and to teach each other. It's important to be able to look at learning as a central element of engaging and delivering good care and creating a good work environment. Gary.
So we'll talk a little bit more about this, but something for everybody to consider is what happens if at work managers aren't really there to manage, but they're there to teach. So they become teachers as opposed to someone trying to control. Instead of controlling, they're trying to release energy, which I think is one of the geniuses of Montessori.
Because one of the things we talk about is, if you're a chief executive officer, if you're a person in charge, and you say that it's important for you to have tight control over a residential setting, for example. If you have that control, then make people stop calling off. Make the high staff turnover stop. And what we usually hear after that remark is, well, that's just the way the system is. There's nothing we can do about it. And we hear very similar things with persons with dementia. That's just what dementia is. There's nothing we can do about it. We've tried everything. And when you take 3 steps back, it becomes obvious that each of these issues is connected and they're related to the same things. It's about changing the way we think, changing the way we act, and creating a very different culture based on a very different set of values and approaches. And so that's where Maria Montessori leads us. And so the 3 key values of a Montessori approach are equality, dignity, and respect. And amazing results are achieved when you apply these to persons with dementia, when you apply them to staff. You see in persons with dementia the reduction of behaviors that are sometimes called the behaviors of concern. In Australia, I know some people call them problem or challenging behaviors, but these are just behaviors. This is the same way you and I would react under the same circumstances. These are human behaviors. And in staff, what you see are people who may come in late to work, or who come in and are not engaged also, and who may be afraid. It's about being able to treat staff with equality, dignity, and respect as well. How can you ask staff to treat residents or clients with equality, dignity, and respect if they are not treated that way in turn? And so what happens is you have high staff turnover, and you build on sand if you're trying to teach people how to work with persons with dementia, because the turnover is so great and it's a job that people don't want to come to. And so we must change that culture.
It's interesting, Cameron, will come up a little bit later in the presentation, but equality, dignity, and respect, when you unpack them, they're much more complex than they look. To give you an example, we were working with a number of places that get rid of their annual evaluation process, and instead put something in that feels and is actually not counterproductive. But one of the things that employees will say is, when you ask them, if someone's going to sit down with you and the purpose is to care about you, not to grade you, but to care about you, they'll say, I'd like it to be in a neutral place. I'd like it to be so that we're equal. We're not in your office. I'm not on the other side of your desk, nor is it a place that you pick. Maybe we could both decide what place we want to meet together. So I think, like, when Marie Montessori did that in schools, it sounds simple, but it takes a lot of thought and preparation to really carry out equality, dignity, and respect. So that's definitely one thing that I've learned is, you might feel like things are equal, but to the other person, when you have positional authority, often not equal.
And translating that into direct care. If you're going to be working with a person with dementia, for example, in a wheelchair, talk to them at their eye level. I mean, it's a very simple, easy thing, but it's also a critical thing. Again, positional authority. And so you want to be in a state of equality with them. It's a simple thing to do, but it has profound effects.
Cameron did a really, really cool exercise with a number of folks with dementia in Los Angeles, and at the end of it, he asked them, do you have any other thoughts or suggestions? And one of them said, you know, we're here and we live here. The staff come in and the staff have name badges, but we don't. It doesn't feel equal, right? And so why is that good for them but not good for us? So they can remember a new person who's a staff member. If we have a new resident comes in, how would we remember that person's name? Not related to dementia, just related to being human, right?
Yeah.
And so now they've implemented, and I'm sure there's a number of stories we can talk about. Should we go next slide, Cameron?
Yeah.
Oops. So we're going to talk about these basic concepts, applying them with residents, with staff, but we're going to try to apply it specifically to two places that we're working together with. One's in Sarasota, Florida, Sunnyside Village, a very cool place. And the other is Roundtree Gardens, an equally cool place in Los Angeles. So we're going to be reviewing some case studies. Both of these places have had a lot of interest in saying, hey, this world could be different. How can it be different, not just for someone that we're caring for, but for everybody that's involved? If you'd add anything else. Well, Cameron, you might want to add a little bit about, at Sunnyside, we're going to be talking about the grant, and then at Roundtree, we'll be talking about some different things that they did.
Right, so we're trying to create resources, resources for staff to use, but also resources for how to manage using a Montessori approach. Think about Montessori for executives, as well as supervisors of line staff. And so we're working at Sunnyside through a contract with Florida State University. They have a grant from the Health Resources Services Administration to create resources for training in pediatric care. So that's part of this process also. And so a lot of times people ask us, why should we do this? And there's two reasons. One is it's the right thing to do, but also it's a good business model. When you have to talk with owners or executives or people who sign the checks, they want to know about return on investment. And you can like that, you can not like that, but wherever I've worked, I've put up a sign which says it's not enough to be right, we must be effective. And you can say you were right and they just wouldn't listen to me and you feel better, but it doesn't help dementia or staff. And so to be effective, you have to be able to speak a number of languages. One of them is accountants speak and executives speak and owners speak. And so when we apply approaches, what is you get a higher census as people are more actively engaged, you get better walkthroughs. You know, when a family is touring a place and they're guided not only on the tour by staff, but also by residents who talk about their home and are introduced to members of the welcoming committee who tell the family that, you know, here we are a community. When they find out, for instance, in places in this country, in Belgium, persons in memory care interview staff before they're hired, get a higher census because this is where people would want to live. It's also a place where you see lower staff turnover because you see this reduction behaviors that would be stressful otherwise. It's also a better place to come to work. You see lower workmen's compensation costs because when you have relationship and community, not only among staff together, they help each other and you see reductions in accidents. And then you see lower food costs for you. When residents are given choice in terms of what they're going to eat and how much, can choose options when they're part of the menu planning and when they also can help make snacks and cooking activities. We've reports of 40% reduction in food cost by moving over to a Montessori choice and resident-driven system. That's what gets the attention of people who write checks, and then you see it implemented. We've also done research in skilled nursing care and in assisted living. And when you're able to apply these approaches throughout the day, these are the results that you begin to get. A huge reduction in the use of antipsychotics, as well as anti-anxiety medications, antidepressants. It's really strange when people are engaged during the day, they don't need hypnotics, sleep aids at night, and you often get the elimination of the use of hypnotics. You see reductions in employee turnover. You see weight gain. You see sleeping at night. You see better census, retaining activities of daily living in residence. When you understand that people have the capacity to retain or recover capacity, it changes the ballgame completely. And so there's no downside to this. I mean, there's no downside to this. The only price tag is that you have to change. You have to change your way of thinking and your way of doing things. We see absolutely similar results in assisted living memory care, declines in medication and turnover, increases in weight, increase in census, better regaining and improvement in activities of daily living. These are the numbers we get from research, and these are numbers that are gathered by the industry that they look at. This is what's important to them. You have to be able to push around those measures to be taken seriously.
For those of you who aren't familiar, Gallup K12 is a measure of employee engagement. And on the screen, you see on the left that the average in the United States, it's actually worse in different countries across the world, and it's a little better in some, but not by much. So the average engaged employee is only 30%. So 70% of employees at most workplaces are either actively disengaged or not engaged. Roundtree has done a lot of work on their culture, and they elevated their engaged score 60%. And if you notice too, their actively disengaged score went down to just 4%, which when you look at that, those bars on the right side of your screen, that according to Gallup is a world-class organization. I think there's only 8% of companies around the world that score higher than them. Now, what's really fascinating to Cameron and I is Roundtree worked at increasing their employee engagement for different purposes, but then they brought in Cameron to work with residents. And so one of the things Cameron and I are curious about is is it easier for Montessori principles to stick if you have employees that have a higher level of engagement? So we're doing a little work on that. Sunnyside, I don't have their numbers. They use a different method of employee engagement, but Sunnyside, which we'll talk about a little bit here, also scores off the chart, really related to employee engagement. So both of these organizations have been very diligent in culture, and now they're welcoming in Montessori principles related to residents, since we're dovetailing that together. What Cameron was saying just a minute ago, workers' comp, and for those of you who aren't familiar with that, that just means if you go to work and you get hurt, it is a cost to the organization or to the government, depending on what country that you're in. Both the companies that we'll be talking about have extremely low workers' compensation rates. And I'm going to just briefly say, in my opinion, why that is. It's pretty obvious if you go to work and you fall and you've broken your arm. it's obvious that you have a physical injury, and that can kind of get, you go to a clinic and you have actual costs for that, hard costs and soft costs. However, if you go to work and you get an emotional injury, where you don't feel emotionally safe, so you might be physically safe, but not emotionally safe. You don't feel like you can say what's on your mind. You don't feel like your opinion counts. You're not sure if you say something, if someone will retaliate. Those also contribute to a disengaged staff. And so when you're looking at these numbers, this is taking care of physical injuries, but also creating an emotionally safe environment where people can really learn to be themselves. And and I want you to remember back where Marie Montessori was talking and teaching kids that were teachable, kids that weren't doing well in school. Well, there's a lot of workers that don't do well at work. They don't look forward to going to work for a lot of different reasons. Very similar to how kids didn't look forward to going to school. Very similar to how you'll have someone in a dementia neighborhood that's knocking on the door all day long, wants to get out. They want to get out because they don't want to stay there. It may have nothing to do with them being of dementia. That may not be the thing. And so I think Montessori really rightfully said, hey, maybe if someone's failing school, it's not the kid, it may be the teacher. It may be the school, not the kid. And change that environment and got a different result. Same thing related to folks with dementia, and the same thing related to employees. Anything you want to add to that, Cameron?
Yeah, it's like this. When we see a person who is standing at the door saying, I want to go home, or a person with dementia who's asked the same question over and over again, the first thing that we say is we ask, why is this happening? And the answer cannot be because of dementia. How do you know they have dementia? Because this is happening. It doesn't help. So we have to look for the primary cause, and it's usually an unmet human need. We haven't thought that way. Why a staff member, for instance, is coming in consistently late. The typical approach to hammer them is just we don't ask why. We don't think in terms of the humanizing of the process. So many of these staff are working 2 jobs. They may be single parents. It's about being able to create relations and let a person be able to have a safe environment to come to work to. It's when you take, as I said before, you take 3 steps back and you begin to look at this and see these are the same issues. These are the same problems, and we can solve them in the same way. I'll just say from this slide, you'll see Sunnyside Village and Roundtree. We've done a lot of work with the Women Group, which is a CCRC organization with Frontier Management in the United States. But you'll also notice that there are companies like Westinghouse and the Electron Energy Corporation and SEC Power Term Services Company, Canon. And so Gary and Joe and people at Monarch have also been looking at employee engagement and the use of these principles outside of senior care, because it's the same issues. It's the same issues. And it's the same approach that we have to learn how to take.
Cameron, why don't you go through a couple of the, skip ahead to a few, but maybe just look around on Marie Montessori in case folks aren't familiar.
All right, so she was an Italian educator, the first woman MD in Italy at the turn of the medicine. She was a human rights advocate, a champion for the rights of children, women, and all humanity. Again, nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize 3 times. So if you want to follow a leader, a very good leader to follow. emphasized respect, dignity, equality for all humans. Her first job out of medical school was to work with children who were thought to be unteachable. Today, they would be labeled things like ADHD, Asperger's, autism, Down syndrome. And she saw the regular classroom environment they were placed in failing, and she said, this is crazy. The environment's crazy. We have to create an environment that will enable them to learn. We have to use the strengths and abilities they have as opposed to trying to force them to do things the way everybody else does. And so she used a rehabilitation for education. She created an environment that would support children's learning and gave them an active role in the classroom. Learn by doing, not just by listening. And she saw education as a way for a better life for these kids. Her first school for preschool children was the Casa Bambini in the poor district of Rome, 1907. And her first school, it had a chair, a desk, a filing cabinet, and that was pretty much it. And over 50 children of illiterate parents piled into that classroom on January the 5th, 1907. And since then, Montessori schools have spread around the world. She spent time in India during World War II. She knew Gandhi. And so she's a profound thinker. And when she died, she was in the Netherlands. And they asked her, where do you want to be buried? And she said, buried where I die. I'm a citizen of the world. So here's an example of a Montessori teaching tool. So children were using this as a puzzle. And you lift up the wooden pieces with the pegs. And after you've taken off the pieces, you put them on their outline. So the outline, in this case of California, you'd put California on it, Louisiana on, Florida there. And after you've done that a few times and you place everything together on the outline, then you're given the puzzle pieces again without an outline. But, locations by manipulating these things. And, a student who's learned how to put together this puzzle will never tell you that Colorado is on the border of Mexico. Just saying. But what else do you see here? Here's a hint. Look at those pegs. Okay. The state capitals are located. And unconsciously, automatically, effortlessly, just by manipulating the material and learn the locations of the state capitals. And it's this learning system, this automatic, unconscious, effortless learning system that's available early in life and that's still available to persons with, if we want to tap into it. Gandhi, Maria Montessori when she comes to India. So, Gare.
Yeah, so this is an interesting slide. It's almost a philosophic slide. If you think about what you did prior to this webinar, you might have taken a shower in the morning or a bath. You might have gone out to eat or gone to a store and bought something. You might be more of a person who likes to stay up late, or you might be one who's early riser. Not have cable TV, but you might be watching things off of Netflix, or you have control of a lot of choices. And I think one of the things Maria Montessori learned is how to offer choice to folks. So I visited a Montessori school, and I was just fascinated. The one child that I talked to, he was putting together a puzzle, and kind of like what Cameron said, it was a puzzle of a bird, and it had wood pieces, and so he was putting them in, and I noticed underneath the puzzle pieces were the bones of the bird. And the teacher told me, oh, well, that's underneath there because that's what we're going to be talking about next. So that's the prepared environment. But what really fascinated me is I asked him, well, how did you know to put that puzzle together? And he said, well, this child was probably first grade level. And he said, I have 8 puzzles that I have to put together this week, and I get to choose I want to do that. So that was up to him when he put that puzzle together. So he had choice. It's interesting to me how often we take choice away when you're in an institutional setting, both from residents and from staff, down to their schedule for staff, to residents, choices about activity. And it's subtle. We may think we're doing a good job with offering choice, but if you really think about it, there are many different ways to offer choice that we're probably not practicing. So control is all about having choices. When Cameron said before about someone coming in late to work, a manager's instinct is typically to give them a corrective action. Is to exert more control, as opposed to talking with a person about what other choices do you have to get to work on time. Can we try to figure that out together? Do you want anything else, Cameron? Or?
Yeah, I mean, Gary, I know you like to talk about the example of Monday morning, which is hated by managers in long-term care, because they come in from the weekend and the first thing they have to deal with is people who've called off, who are sick or can come in, and they have to figure out how to rearrange schedules and to make sure everything's covered. But in a system where staff are engaged and empowered, what often happens is the manager comes in and the staff say, here are the people who won't be able to come in today. Here's our plan so that we can make sure that everything's covered and that the residents will be taken care of.
Yeah,
that is a wildly different system, but a very different experience for the staff and for the manager.
And one of the heartwarming stories that touches me is from Sunnyside, where they put in place a morning report where I think it was at 10:15, a number of the staff would get together to sort of get reset about their day, kind of like a huddle, a quick thing. And bless her heart, they have a really neat staff developer there, and she started off by modeling the huddle. She led it. We trained folks on what are the objectives, and then she asked for volunteers to lead it, and that led to them actually having a sign-up sheet, and anybody from any department could sign up for the huddles and to lead them. And so even someone from laundry, someone from the business office could come. And so by offering those choices, people stepped up and they took a role in the community. So they're really attending to themselves. And it worked to improve morale, and it worked to break down silos. And that's very similar in a neighborhood with dementia, is where you have residents that can have more control than perhaps that you think that might have. Cameron.
Right. My wife and I wrote a book on teaching empathy and conflict resolution to people with dementia. If you create a true community where you have people living together and people who have now more control over their lives, like we create in resident-driven communities, then you'll also potentially have more conflict. You know, if everybody is sitting in a chair with their chin on their chest around the wall, there's no conflict, but there's no life there either. And so we have to be prepared for success. If we're able to empower residents and be able to let them take control of their lives, give control back to residents, then we also have to have the tools available to enable people to resolve conflicts and to have empathy. You know, you'll see behaviors like in high school where the people who are not in walkers sometimes insult the people in walkers or say, why are they here? And the people in moderate stage dementia say, I don't want those people with more advanced dementia around here. How can we create empathy, and how can we enable people to resolve their conflicts? So This is a resource that we developed, and actually it's published by Jessica Kingsley Publishers, which is the same publishers in the UK that Kate has published with in the past. So just to say that it's all human stuff.
Cameron, I am going to skip over some slides.
Yes.
And to keep us moving, and we're going to land on the slide about Montessori Principles.
Excellent.
I'm just going to slowly put these on the screen. If you want to talk about, pick out a couple that you might want to talk about, I'll pick about a couple, and then we'll move into the HRSA grant and into Roundtree.
Great. So everything we do should have a sense of purpose, never busy work. True for residents, true for staff. You invite persons to participate. You say, would you, as opposed to can you. Would you gives control to the person with dementia. Can you is a test. Can you do this? Little things like this make a difference. Gary, I'll let you translate these in a couple of them into how we work with staff, also using the same principles.
Yeah. So one of the ones that I think is fascinating is if you are talking with an employee about something that you're disappointed in, you can start off by inviting them as opposed to telling them that you need to talk to them, and offer choice right out of the gate. So you could start off by saying, hey, I have something that I'd like to talk with you about. Is this a good time? Or would you prefer a different time? So right there, you're offering choice. And you're starting off with the person leading towards you instead of leading away from you. So that would be an example of that.
Right.
If I flip this one more time, you see in the middle, all these things point toward respect, equality, and dignity. We've been making this a regular practice to ask at the end of almost anything that we do, if you look there to the right in the corner, did you enjoy this? And would you want to do this again? I think one of the geniuses of Marie Montessori is asking students, hey, at the end of the day, was this a good day? And if it wasn't a good day, what could we do to make it a better day? A big thing in the work environment, as well as that one on the near the bottom on the right, when there's a mistake, think engagement rather than failure. Particularly in skilled nursing homes, it's a culture or environment of got you and problems. And so people are used to either pass, fail. I either did this right or I did it wrong. It doesn't really occur to folks to say, however you did it, that was the right way for you to do it. Maybe we could learn a better way. And so you then, by not getting into that, you develop a culture of fear where people say, I'm either measure up or I don't measure up. Cameron, maybe just before we go on, I think if you could just unpack that a little bit, that's very similar to if you ask someone, can you do something or would?
Right. It's about enabling people to have the role of an equal. Would you help me with this? Would you help me set the table? Would you help me make your bed? For example, if a woman, I've seen this happen many times. A staff member comes in and says, please get out of bed. I need to get you dressed. And the person says, I don't want to get out of bed. It's very different than if a staff member comes in and says, would you show me how you would like your bed made? And that puts the resident in the role of the expert, of the person who is being asked, what is your preference? Being given that choice. The resident gets a chance to demonstrate how they like their bed to be made. But when they feel that way, they come out of bed to show you, and guess what? They're out of bed and you haven't had to beg them. And then, of course, I also see where the staff will say, we have some other people who can't make their own bed. Would you help me make some of their beds? Would that be all right with you? And of course, to do that, the resident has to get dressed to come out of their room. It's all about how we treat people like people.
Cameron, how about the gentleman
Yeah.
that actually made his bed?
Oh yeah, uh, I was given a photo last month of a gentleman who wasn't wanting to take part in flower arranging and the usual bingo kind of activities, but they found that he'd been a woodworker, and so he was able to hook up with guys in maintenance in the woodworking shop. And I got an email which said, it was a really cool day yesterday because he finally made his bed. And I said, did he get his sheets and everything? No. He made his bed, and they showed me a picture of a 4-poster that he made that he's now sleeping on. And there you look at, once again, activity that has purpose and meaning for the individual.
Yeah, do you want to talk a little bit about the Hirsch grant?
Yeah, and so as I mentioned before, we're working with Sunnyside Village on a grant to look at how to incorporate Montessori principles into standard care, standard practice. We have data gathering that we do. We look at, for instance, this is an app that's out there in the Apple Store, and we're developing an Android version of it now, and we're also developing a SurveyMonkey version of it with Gary's daughter, Sarah, for this project. But we're able to track the kind of activity that's involved. We look at whether the principles are being applied, invited to the activity or not, were manipulatives used or not, learned by doing. And so by doing this, we do 2 things. One is we track whether or not the training is actually being implemented in real time on the floor, but also this becomes a feedback loop for staff so that they can improve in areas where they're not applying, and we can give better one-to-one training on how to more effectively implement these principles. You can see we have tons and tons of material. It's a short amount of time, but we'll try to give you a good sample. And one of the things that's critically important if we want to be able to engage people is to learn their strengths. And so when we work with persons with dementia, we ask staff members to think about a person who is presenting challenges. And then we say, all right, step back 3 steps once again, and let's talk about what strengths they have. Do they have sensory capabilities? Can they see? Can they touch? What are their motor skills? What social skills do they have? Can they speak? Can they speak in sentences? Can they speak in paragraphs? Can they answer questions? Cognitive skills. Can they count? Can they put a template, put something on its outline? So for example, there was a woman who was very, very hard of hearing, and she was in an exercise group, and she had a personal companion. And the staff member who was leading the group said, point your toes. And the woman couldn't hear well, and she says, pick my nose. I don't want to pick my nose. And everybody started yelling at her, shut up. And she was saying, you shut up. And so I wrote down on a card the words, watch her, do what she does. Handed it to the companion and told her, let the woman read this and then point to the exercise leader. And when the woman read, watch her do what she, and saw the exercise leader, she pointed her toes. She still had the capacity to see. And so we worked with the strength as opposed to the, and it is the same thing with regard to staff. What are their strengths as opposed to looking at what they have trouble with? How can we enable them to be the, as Gary says, the best person that can be on the job? What if the person who is a person in housekeeping is a great singer? How can we enable that strength to be able to be part of her job or his job? And so it's about focusing on capability as opposed to deficits, and then looking at strengths that people have and asking, how can we enable activity as part of what the resident does as part of the job routine to tap into those strengths.
So we're going to talk a little bit about Roundtree. And I'm going to preface this by saying, can you imagine a long-term care, skilled nursing, assisted living, residential living, where they encourage staff to daydream? And that's part of their job. Part of their job is to daydream. I'm going to talk about why that's true at Roundtree. They're doing a number of things that really propelled their engagement scores high, and they aren't the sort of typical things that a corporation would do. And so their goal was really equality, dignity, and respect, both for staff and for residents. One of the things that they did was to jettison their annual evaluation process. I won't talk a lot about that, but we have a lot of companies that if you get an annual evaluation in your job, I feel for you. They are an active disengager. They really don't do anything for the organization except drag it backwards. And for the most part, it's impossible to rate staff in a similar fashion. So for one person to rate a group of staff and another person, the ratings things doesn't work in our environment. Most staff experience annual evaluations as disrespectful. I was walking down the hall in an organization and I saw a nurse come out of a room, and a nursing assistant was following her, and the nursing assistant tossed some papers in the trash, and I had said to her, "Oh, what was that?" She said, "Oh, that was my annual evaluation." She got a good evaluation. She just said, "It doesn't mean anything to me." And crazy stuff. We have examples of people who halfway through their evaluation, their name changes because someone cut and pasted from another one. All kinds of horror stories. So it takes courage for an organization to say, that's not a control that we can dial and has us help us warm up our culture. What staff want instead is coaching. And so what they're really looking for is an on the spot. If I'm doing something that I shouldn't be doing, tell me about it. Don't be afraid of me. And if we get all that stuff off the table because we're regularly having a good relationship, then I'd like to sit down every now and then and talk about where I'm going and what are some goals for me. So one of the things Roundtree is doing, Sunnyside as well. The CEO at Roundtree also runs the business where he deals with folks and investments. And one of the things he realized is, for all my clients that are investors, I know a lot about them. And it's my job to know about them. And he realized, boy, we have care plans for residents, social histories, but we don't for employees. So he uses Salesforce, which is a customer relation tool. And he had a person go around their organization. And this is dedication, took about 8 months to accomplish this, where they gathered, and I just put a sample on here, where they gathered about 340, no, I'm sorry, it's about 100 items about each employee. And so they actually sat down and interviewed the employees and said, "Can you tell me about your favorite holiday? Tell me about your favorite vacation, your favorite music, your favorite animal, favorite food, favorite drink." And what was fascinating to me is their employee reaction to that was not, "Hey, you're invading my privacy." Their employee reaction was, "I've never had an employer ask me this. Like, I'm impressed. I'm impressed that you're that interested in me." What they do with that data is it's available so that people can use that. So for instance, if you want to recognize an employee for any particular reason, like a manager, they would be able to access this and say like, "Oh, I can look and see what your favorite food and your favorite drink is, and I'm going to go get that for you." So they not only gathered that, but they actually breathed that into their culture. I talked a little bit about dreaming. Roundtree did some work on what does it mean to be creative? Like what is creativity? And where does creativity come from? A lot of times creativity comes from hardship, but it also comes from being able to pause, stop that mental chatter in your brain, and being able to have another thought come in. A lot of people daydream in the shower in the morning. One of the things they thought is, this is a very tough business. We need creativity here. And this was before this whole virus thing. So they thought, like, how do we give staff the permission to each week have a specific period of time where they daydream, where they can be allowing creative thoughts to come into their mind. And I'm talking about all staff. So we're talking equal. We're talking nursing assistants, laundry workers on up. And they also personalize job descriptions. So it's not, I don't know if you can see me, but it's not a square job description, but it's more of a puzzle piece. So each job description is personalized.
One of the things that also is really interesting that Gary talks about, I've heard in the past, is doing away with exit interviews and replacing those with staying interviews.
Yeah. And so that's the thought of, why can't I, when you have that moment where your attachment to the organization gets shaky, can I walk alongside you there? I would encourage all of you. There's an awesome video called Gratitude by Louis Schwartzberg on TED Talks. It's just, I think it's one of the best videos I've ever seen. But he really talks about gratitude and how, I won't go into it, but he talks about how through time-lapse photography, you can actually see a flower opening and how to be grateful for that. What are things to be really grateful for? Well, the staff at Roundtree, this is one of the things that they sort of spent time on. They spent time on, how do we have grateful hearts? Like, what is that? What is that for our company, and what is that for each of us? And they came up with the idea of, when the supervisors are meeting with the folks that they supervise, they want them to have a discussion about, if this was the last time I would ever see you, what would I really want to say to you? What I want to say that I'm grateful for. So not what do I need from you, or, what did you do, but what is it that I am actually grateful for? So it really promotes a culture of engagement and warmth and love. And so if you can increase the amount of love in the organization, it's one of the things that will, by the way, decrease your workers' comp. It will increase your engagement. And Cameron and I are sort of investigating, will it retain staff more, so that when they learn these Montessori techniques, they don't quit.
And it also increases census. And we've seen that at Roundtree also in memory care, because it is a very different place on a walkthrough now.
Cameron, we've got maybe just 5 more minutes, because I think Kate said to keep it to about an hour. I was thinking about doing this in one other slide, and then we can kind of open for questions.
Yeah, that sounds great. So we talk about human behaviors. It's a human thing. And it's true of staff, it's true of residents. People want meaning in what they do. They want to be able to environment that brings out the best in them, that allows them to circumvent their deficits and utilize their strengths. It involves a sense of community. So, for example, there is a Goodman Group residence in Florida where we've been working, and they won an award in their memory care neighborhood from the Pioneer Network for Innovation and Community Involvement. The memory care residents created a social concerns committee, and every quarter they would take on a social concern. One quarter they collected toiletries and brought them to persons in a homeless shelter. it was interesting that when they got there, the staff were wondering what to do, and the residents just barreled in, and gave these, and told people they were praying for them and that life would get better. You know, this is what human beings do. We're at our best when we're doing things for others, when we think outside of ourselves. And so it's about communities and being able to be in relationship with each other and then connected to the outside world. Even something as simple as on an advanced dementia neighborhood in Florida, Goodman Group, the nurse who is the manager there started a new program where she introduces pairs of residents to each other. And she said, you know, I thought we were thinking just because they live together, they know each other, but that's not true. But if people are introduced to each other, they start talking to each other and they find out about each other. And a simple thing like that has really brought people together and started setting up a sense of community. And so, you know, we can look at staff as well. I know, Gary, you can talk you've talked about huddles, and also there are other techniques like learning circles.
Yeah, and maybe we'll end with that. If you look on this slide on the resident meaningful activities, community involvement, and prepare the environment, if you think about the companion piece of that, for staff, it's if you have a prepared environment for team communication, accountability, and coaching. And just to give you an example of team communication, that means daily huddles, weekly updates, and monthly staff meetings. And it breaks my heart, but it's not unusual at all for us to go into an organization, and I'll go to a dining department and I'll ask them, hey, tell me about the last time you all had a team meeting. And they'll say, oh, that might have been 8 or 9 months ago. Tell me when the last time you guys have a daily huddle. Well, we used to have a huddle, but people were just complaining, so we just gave up on that. Or when have you had sort of a weekly update? And they would say, like, I don't even know what that is. So just the idea of team communication, it's like, you know, perhaps if Maria Montessori schools, where she started, where she had no communication with her as the headmistress with the teachers. And so she had to organize that. And so this is part of being organized at work. You know, I would probably just say one more thing, Cameron, and then if you have one more thing and we could open it for questions. Yeah. I've been in this business for close to 40 years. And I am shocked at, you know, when you think about these concepts, they seem very basic. But within each of these concepts, it's very complex for how to actually live these things out. It's very complex when you want to go meet with a group of folks from the laundry, for instance, and your first instinct is to say, let's meet up in the private dining room. That way you guys can get out of the laundry and we can meet up there. Right there, you're not giving them their choice. You're probably also not giving them what time it would be good for you to meet. So it's in these simple truths that I think when you unpack that, both for residents and for staff, you open up a whole world that's just pretty amazing. As opposed to sort of getting a program and trying to put that in place, where people have to either they fit in or they don't. They're either successful or they're failures. One of Cameron's big thing is just start where you can be successful and try. There's all kinds of stuff you can try. Like you can make this your own. I don't know if you want to add anything else, Cameron, then we could go to questions.
Yeah, we always say there are 3 questions to ask residents when you want to get a sense of what a place is like, and to kind of take its temperature. The first question to ask residents and persons with dementia in general is, what do you do? And, you know, if you do everything for the resident, then they have nothing to do. And everyone needs that sense. Montessori said, everything you do for me, you take away from me. So what sort of opportunities are we giving? How much control are we giving? The second thing is how often we ask that. I remember at Roundtree, we asked a woman what she would in the memory care neighborhood, and she said, it would be really nice if we could take our lunch and eat outside every once in a while. You know, I would have not have thought of that.
I thought you were talking about the lady at Roundtree that said she wanted a beer.
Well, that's another story. And then the final thing to ask is, what is it like to live here? What is it like to live here? And I remember in France, we were greeted at a nursing home that's been using Montessori for some time. That's an amazing place. And the woman who greeted us has learned how to write poetry after she moved into the nursing home with dementia. And her poem was in beautiful rhyming French. And it said something like, I love my new home. I love my friends and my family that are here now. And when I die, I will look down from heaven and smile at my nursing home. What is it like to live here? And so this is what's possible. This is what's being done. This is not pie in the sky. It's also a very good return on investment. It's a good business model. There's no reason not to do this other than you have to give up control. You have to give control back to residents. You have to give control to staff. But when you do, it's a different world. And that's what we have to bring. We have to bring a new world in out of the midst of the old, to again quote Maria Montessori. So there we are. We'll open up for questions.